The afternoon sun sat low over the street and painted the shops in soft light. David walked slowly along the sidewalk with steady steps and a calm face. He carried a thin folder under his arm and thought about getting home before dark. His day had been long and quiet, and nothing felt out of place. People passed him without looking twice, and the air felt normal and light. David lived a simple life and kept his routine steady. He worked hard and avoided conflict whenever possible. His neighbors knew him as a respectful man who greeted others with a nod or a short smile. He believed that calm behavior kept problems away. That belief had guided him for many years. As David reached the middle of the block, a police car rolled in behind him. The sound of tires on the road caught his attention. He turned his head slightly and noticed the car slowing down. At first he thought nothing of it. Police cars passed through the area often. A sharp voice called out and asked him to stop. David froze for a moment and then slowly turned around. He lifted his hands just enough to show he was not holding anything. His face showed confusion but not fear. He asked politely if there was a problem. Two officers stepped out of the car and watched him closely. Their posture was stiff and their eyes did not relax. One officer told David that he matched a description. David asked what the description was and why he was being stopped. The answer came fast but made little sense. David stayed still and spoke calmly. He explained that he was coming from work and was on his way home. He offered to show his identification and kept his movements slow. His voice remained steady even as his heart beat faster. The officers did not respond to his explanation. One of them raised his voice and told David not to move. The other officer stepped closer and repeated the command. People nearby slowed down and began to watch. A few took out their phones and started recording. David stood exactly where he was. He asked again what he had done wrong. His question was met with silence followed by accusation. One officer said David was resisting. The word felt heavy and wrong. David looked confused and asked how he was resisting when he had not moved. The tension grew quickly. The officers moved in and forced David down. His folder fell to the ground and papers scattered across the sidewalk. David did not fight back and did not raise his voice. He felt the cold surface of the street beneath him and the weight of the moment pressing down. People around them gasped softly and whispered. Some looked angry while others looked afraid. A woman nearby shook her head and stepped back. A man across the street held his phone steady and recorded everything. David was placed in restraints and pulled to his feet. His arms felt tight and uncomfortable. He was guided toward the police car while still asking what he had done wrong. No clear answer came. As he was placed into the back seat, the door shut with a heavy sound. The world outside felt distant and blurred. David sat quietly and tried to steady his breathing. His thoughts raced as confusion turned into concern. He had always believed that following rules kept people safe. He had trusted that calm behavior would protect him. Sitting in the back of the car made him question that belief. He wondered how a normal walk home had turned into this moment. The car began to move and the street passed by slowly. David looked through the window at familiar places that now felt strange. He thought about his family and the calls he still needed to make. He felt a deep need to be heard. At the station, David was taken inside and placed in a small room. The walls were plain and the light above him was bright. Time felt slow and heavy. He waited without knowing what would happen next. An officer finally entered and repeated the claim of resisting. David listened carefully and asked for details. The explanation remained unclear and short. David realized that logic alone would not change the situation. He sat quietly after the officer left and thought carefully. David knew he had done nothing wrong. He also knew that many people would never hear his side unless he spoke up. He remembered a contact saved on his phone that he had never used before. That number had been given to him years earlier during a community meeting. It was meant for emergencies and serious concerns. David had saved it and forgotten about it. Now it returned to his mind with sharp clarity. He asked for his phone, and after some delay, it was placed in front of him. His hands shook slightly as he unlocked it. He took a deep breath and scrolled carefully. David understood the weight of what he was about to do. He knew that making this call could change his life. He also knew that staying silent would change it in another way. With steady resolve he pressed the number and waited. The line rang as his heart beat faster. David did not know who would answer or what would follow. He only knew that this moment mattered. The call connected and a calm voice answered. David spoke clearly and explained where he was and what had happened. He chose his words carefully and stayed respectful. He felt a strange mix of fear and hope as he spoke. When the call ended, David sat back and closed his eyes. He did not know what the next hours would bring. He only knew that the truth had left his lips and traveled far beyond the small room. Outside the station, the day continued as normal. Cars passed and people walked by unaware of the chain of events that had begun. Inside the building, David waited quietly. This was no longer just about a misunderstanding. It had become something much larger. The choices made in the next moments would affect many lives. And somewhere far away, someone important was now listening. The small room felt colder as time passed, and the light above David stayed bright and unkind. He sat on a hard chair with his hands resting on his knees and his back straight. His mind replayed the call again and again. He wondered if anyone on the other end truly understood how serious the situation was. Minutes turned into a long stretch of waiting, and the silence felt heavy. David listened to distant footsteps and doors opening and closing. Each sound made his heart jump slightly. He reminded himself to stay calm and focused. An officer entered the room and looked at David with a different expression than before. The voice was lower and less sharp. The officer asked David to wait a little longer and then left again. David noticed the change and felt a small shift in the air. Outside the room, the station began to feel uneasy. Phones rang more often and officers moved faster through the halls. Quiet conversations happened in corners and stopped when others walked by. Something unseen had started moving through the building. David stayed seated and kept his eyes forward. He thought about his childhood and the lessons his parents taught him. They had always told him to stand for truth, but never with anger. Those lessons felt important now. Another officer entered and asked David simple questions about his work and his day. The tone was polite and careful. David answered honestly and clearly. He noticed that the officer avoided eye contact when certain details came up. The folder that had fallen earlier was returned to David. Papers were now out of order and slightly bent. David gathered them slowly and held them close. It felt like holding proof of his normal life before everything changed. In another part of the station, two senior officials stood near a desk and read messages on a screen. Their faces grew serious with every line they read. One of them sighed deeply and rubbed his forehead. They exchanged few words, but the meaning was clear. A call had reached high levels and it was being taken seriously. Questions were being asked and answers were expected quickly. Names were written down and reports were pulled from files. The earlier confidence of the arresting officers began to fade. Back in the room, David was offered water and a chance to rest. He accepted the water and took a slow sip. His hands had stopped shaking, but his thoughts were sharp and alert. He wondered how many times situations like this had happened without anyone listening. That thought made him both sad and determined. He knew that what he did next mattered beyond his own case. The door opened again, and this time two officers entered together. Their posture was stiff and their voices careful. They informed David that his situation was under review. No apology was offered yet, but the words felt different from before. David nodded and listened quietly. He did not interrupt or argue. He understood that patience was now his strongest tool. Outside the station, a small group of people had gathered. Some were the same ones who had witnessed the arrest earlier. They spoke softly among themselves and watched the doors closely. A sense of waiting filled the air. Inside the station, tension grew among the staff. Supervisors moved from room to room and checked reports. Calls were made and messages sent. The normal flow of the station felt broken. The two officers who made the arrest sat apart from others. Their confidence was gone and their faces showed worry. They spoke little and avoided attention. They knew the situation had gone beyond their control. David was moved to a larger room and asked to sit again. The chair was softer and the space felt less closed. A senior official entered and introduced himself calmly. The official listened carefully as David told his story from the beginning. David spoke clearly and without anger. He described every moment with care and honesty. As the story unfolded, the official took notes and nodded slowly. Certain details made the official pause and look up. The room felt quiet and focused. When David finished speaking, the official thanked him for his patience. The official explained that there were serious concerns about how the arrest was handled. David listened without reacting. He felt relief but stayed composed. He knew that words alone were not enough yet. He waited for actions to follow. The official stepped out and left David alone again. This time the silence felt different. It carried a sense of movement rather than emptiness. In offices nearby, decisions were being made quickly. Reports were reviewed and footage was requested. Timelines were compared and inconsistencies became clear. A call came in that confirmed the concern. The mood in the station shifted fully. The issue was no longer small or local. David sat quietly and looked at the wall in front of him. He felt tired but strong. He trusted that truth was finally being seen. Footsteps approached again and the door opened slowly. What followed would change the course of the day and many lives connected to it. The door opened slowly and a senior official stepped inside with a calm but serious face. David looked up and stood respectfully without being asked. The official asked David to sit and spoke in a steady voice. The room felt heavier but also more honest than before. The official explained that video footage had been reviewed carefully. The footage showed David standing still and following instructions. There was no sign of the claim that had been made against him. David listened quietly and kept his hands folded. As the words continued, David felt a slow release inside his chest. The confusion that had filled his mind began to clear. He realized that the truth was finally speaking louder than the accusation. The official admitted that mistakes had been made. The tone was firm and professional. David did not interrupt and did not smile. He only nodded once to show he understood. Outside the room, activity increased even more. Staff members moved quickly between offices. Phones rang with urgency and voices stayed low but tense. The situation had reached a level that could not be ignored. In a separate office, two high-ranking supervisors reviewed the arrest report line by line. The details did not match the footage. Each difference raised new concerns. The room filled with quiet frustration. One supervisor asked how such a report had been approved. Another shook his head and took notes. They both understood the seriousness of what was unfolding. Back with David, the official explained that he would not be held any longer. The official said David was free to leave at any time. David felt relief but remained composed. David asked one simple question about what would happen next. The official paused before answering. The response was careful but clear. A full internal review had begun. The official explained that accountability mattered. David listened and appreciated the honesty. He stood slowly and adjusted his clothes. As David walked through the hallway, officers watched quietly. Some looked uncomfortable while others looked thoughtful. The energy in the building had changed completely. David reached the front area and was handed his belongings. His phone felt heavier in his hand now. He stepped outside and felt fresh air on his face. A small group of people stood nearby and watched him leave. Some recognized him from earlier. A few nodded in quiet support. David returned the nods without speaking. He walked a short distance and stopped near the edge of the sidewalk. His legs felt tired but steady. He took a deep breath and looked at the sky. David knew this was not the end of the story. He understood that what happened inside that building would reach far beyond it. Inside the station, the review moved quickly. Footage was shared with higher authorities. Statements were collected and timelines were rebuilt. The pressure grew with every passing minute. The two officers involved were called into a private meeting. Their posture was stiff and their voices low. They were informed that their actions were under serious review. The room felt quiet and tense. Neither officer argued. They knew the situation had changed completely. Reports were sent to oversight teams. External review was requested. The station leadership focused on transparency. News of the review spread quickly through official channels. The incident was no longer contained. People in high offices asked for clear answers. David returned home later that day and sat quietly in his living room. The familiar space felt grounding. He placed his folder on the table and sat beside it. His phone buzzed several times with messages he did not read yet. He needed a moment of silence. His body felt tired, but his mind stayed alert. David thought about how easily the situation could have ended differently. He understood how important it was that he had spoken up. As evening approached, he finally checked his phone. Messages of concern and support filled the screen. Some were from people he knew and others from numbers he did not recognize. One message stood out and asked him to share his experience formally. David read it carefully and took time before responding. He understood that his story mattered. He also knew that telling it required courage and patience. Inside the station, the pressure continued to build. Officials prepared statements and gathered evidence. Every decision was being documented carefully. The incident had become a test of integrity. How it was handled would define trust for many people. David sat quietly and looked around his home. He felt a sense of responsibility beyond himself. He knew that the next steps would shape not only his future but the future of others who might face similar moments. The truth was now in motion and it could not be stopped. The next morning arrived quietly, but the world around David felt different. He woke early and sat near the window as light filled the room. His phone rested beside him and remained silent for a moment. He knew that silence would not last long. Inside the city offices, the situation had reached its highest level. Senior leaders reviewed reports carefully and spoke in firm voices. Every detail from the arrest was now clear and confirmed. There was no confusion left. The review concluded that serious mistakes had been made. The report stated that David had followed instructions and showed no wrongdoing. The earlier claim could not be supported. The conclusion was direct and final. Decisions were made swiftly. The officers involved were removed from active duty while further action was prepared. Their roles ended not with anger but with firm accountability. The system chose responsibility over denial. News of the outcome spread through official channels and beyond. People spoke about it at work and at home. Many saw it as a rare moment where truth was fully acknowledged. David received a call later that morning. The voice on the other end was calm and respectful. He was informed of the final decision and offered a formal apology. David listened quietly and thanked the caller. After the call ended, David sat still for a long moment. He felt relief but also reflection. The weight of the past days slowly lifted from his shoulders. Later that day, David was invited to share his experience in a controlled and respectful setting. He agreed after careful thought. He knew his voice could help others feel less alone. When he spoke, David stayed calm and clear. He focused on facts and feelings without anger. He spoke about confusion and fear, but also about hope and fairness. Those who listened took notes and asked thoughtful questions. The room felt focused and sincere. David felt heard in a way he had not felt before. As days passed, official changes followed. Training procedures were reviewed and new guidelines were announced. The incident became a lesson rather than a secret. People in the community spoke openly about trust and responsibility. Conversations happened that had been avoided before. The moment created space for honesty. David returned to his normal routine slowly. He went back to work and walked the same streets again. This time his steps felt stronger. Neighbors greeted him with warmth and quiet respect. Some thanked him for speaking up. Others simply smiled and nodded. David appreciated both. He understood that change does not always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives through patience and courage. The experience stayed with him but no longer weighed him down. It became a reminder of his strength. Inside official buildings, the case continued to be referenced. It stood as proof that accountability mattered. It changed how future decisions were handled. David spent time with his family and shared meals and stories. The comfort of familiar voices helped him heal fully. At night, he reflected on the call he had made. One decision had shifted everything. He knew he would make it again if needed. The officers involved moved on from their roles and faced the outcomes of their actions. The system held firm and fair. The city moved forward with new awareness. Small changes added up to real progress. David looked ahead with calm confidence. He knew challenges would still exist, but so would truth. The story of that day did not end with fear. It ended with accountability and growth. David remained a quiet man, living a simple life. What changed was his understanding of his own voice. He learned that calm strength could reach far places, and that truth, when spoken clearly, could shape the future.